So everybody, thank you and welcome to this panel. We got a few really big brains on this panel that we just want to talk about, like various things that are going on in the space of AI. But before we get started, I'd just like each of the panelists to give a quick introduction to who you are, what you do. Maybe starting here?
Yeah, not in the order of presenting on a slide. I'm Roman. I'm co-founder and chief business officer of Nebius. Nebius is AI cloud. I think in this panel, we are doing the unsexiest part of the work. We are like under the hood to provide reliable and scalable infrastructure for the rest of the people to do their amazing job. Good to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Percy Liang. I'm a professor at Stanford and also a co-founder of Together, where we build a cloud that enables developers. I think a lot about openness in language models, which hopefully we'll talk about, and also benchmarking.
Hi, everyone. Michele, Catasta, president of Replit. Before I was an LLM researcher at Stanford and Google, and now we're building Replit Agent, which is the best platform to create software, no matter what is your background.
And I'm Thomas Wolf. I'm co-founder and chief science officer of Hugging Face, which is a platform to provide models, data sets, and apps. And we also do a lot of work on education around open source and AI models.
We kind of have the full AI stack here personified, right? So we've got research, we've got developer tools, we've got the back-end infrastructure, and we got community. So it's really cool. And I think there's one word that I've been hearing a lot this morning, and it's the 5-letter word beginning with A, agent. And one of the things that I would really love to hear from the panel about is that agent has very much been the word of 2025, and maybe reasoning as well as another word. But where do you see things going? Like if we were sitting here this time next year in 2026, how would we be building on that stuff? What would we be talking about then? And what should developers be interested in and concerned about? Maybe starting and just moving down the line.
Yeah, again, looking from our angle, we are thinking, first of all, on how the infrastructure should be developed to support all this growth. And we see that we finally starting to see this real transition from research and pre-training to building. We see a lot of inference workloads finally coming. And it's very much driven by the agentic system that we see. And another observation that the requirements to infrastructure are becoming more kind of advanced and complicated. So we are not we probably will not be satisfied just with basic physical infrastructure. So this how we develop the software layer, the platform, the orchestration layer becomes very important. That's what we are looking in. Another interesting observation that the good example is AI code generation, and the clouds initially were created and changed the paradigm how developers work. And what we discuss internally a lot is how the cloud and the developers' infrastructure will change when a lot of code will be written by agents and AI systems. So it's not how the infrastructure that for this new generation of developers is comprehensive and reliable should look like. What should it be optimized for? What API, what paradigma, API paradigma will change and so on. So that's how we look at it.
A lot of that's in your wheelhouse, Percy, right?
Yeah. Maybe I would add to that and say, I think about agents in kind of 3 different ways. The first is tool use and the ability for a language model to connect with the environment. So this is clearly going to unlock a lot of different applications and automation, and you can build assistants and so on. It's very natural, and I'm looking forward to that. The second is the ability to spend more time thinking and solving problems. I think this is exciting because we typically think our typical experience with a language model is as you type a query and a response comes back immediately. You count number of tokens per second or time to first token. But really, I think one of the exciting things is you can think about much more ambitious problems that take on the order of hours or even days or weeks. And that's just a very different way of thinking about AI applications. And the third one, from a research perspective, I think is really exciting because I think people think about, we train the model and then now we're going to put it into agents. But I think the exciting thing is that is reinforcement learning with agents, which agent comes from, also is used in the RL context to mean a self-improving system that is not just operating in the world, but actually gets better. And I think one of the exciting things is if we can figure out how to get the kind of equivalent of pre-training for the RL setting, where you have just a vast, diverse set of experiences to draw from, then I think you could build much, much stronger AI.
And how about Michele? Like with Replit, you guys have been building the developer tool for the AI developer, and how's the impact of agentic development going to be on what you do, and how are you enabling developers to do that?
I think we spent the last year getting ready for this moment. And if I can dare to make a prediction in AI, which is usually something that one shouldn't dare, I expect also 2026 to be the year of agents and so forth. And the reason is, the acceleration that we experience in research, starting from deep learning all the way to what we call, I guess, today Gen AI, has happened to make this moment today happen. Like the idea of having agents that are reliable on several different tasks. Some I think are already good enough, and some others, people have expectations that are going to be getting more reliable and more autonomous over time. And we just started. If you use the analogy of self-driving, where we went through different levels of autonomy, the same is happening now with agents. I wouldn't dare to say that Rabbit Agent today is L4 or L5. We're probably at L2.5, L3, getting there. And we're going to take more and more years to reach the level of autonomy and independence that I want. So yeah, my prediction is we're going to keep talking about them, regardless of how the industry calls them, for a while longer.
Cool. And then Hugging Face. I mean, you guys have done amazing work in really making open source, and in creating repositories of models and data and code that we can use to start working with models. But if we want to start now building agentic systems, where do you think Hugging Face could help with that? What role would Hugging Face be taking on in that space?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've been thinking a lot, and we started recently. We started actually just on New Year's Eve, 2025. We released the first education. We started with education. So we released a simple-to-use agent library called Small Agent. The main goal of Small Agent was to show that you don't need 1 million lines of code to have an agentic framework. You can have 1,000 lines of code and something that's simple. And leveraging basically the fact that LLM nowadays can already write very good code. So basically a lot of things which are coding tools or things like that, they can do that naturally, right? And the second thing we did last month was to release a first agent course as well. And we were really blown away by the response to this course. It was something we released, and I would say maybe 8 days after that, we already were close to 100,000 subscriptions to people applying to follow the course, and it's really on way to keep growing. So that just for us, it translated that. It showed for us that basically community really want to learn, to know, and to use agents. So there is this huge democratization. I think everyone wants to start to play with these tools. And I think similarly, what I've seen more generally in the field, and I think it's a big trend of 2025, is we talk a bit less about model release, and we talk a lot more about product release and agent release, right? The latest release from OpenAI was this agent SDK. That's a good example. Maybe even more visible than, GPT 4.5, which would have been typically headlines of 2024, right? Feel like we're moving from focusing on LLM to focusing on product or agent or framework, basically things to build. I think it's very good. It will deflate a little bit the bubble around there is this new bubble coming, what can we do with it? And more toward we're building things. And we see that also in startups. You have Replit, you have many companies who are kind of build things that are really useful, and you don't care so much maybe, or you care less about the LLM that's powering all of that, right? It's not really the goal, to less about that. I think it's very good, puts everyone's foot on the ground, back to what we know, which is, I think, good for today. AI Dev Days, we want to build things, right, with AI. We don't want to only build AI, we want to build things with AI.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right point. I love what Andrew was bringing up earlier on, and I actually refactored his phrase differently. For me, it's move fast and make things, which I like, and I really encourage people to think in those terms: move fast, be responsible, move fast and make things. But I would also say that, like, with all of the interest and all of the excitement around agents, we do have to recall that they're generally being built on top of LLMs, and LLMs have reliability issues, hallucinations, and stuff like that. One of the main things that I get asked, like when I'm consulting with companies and I'm helping them through their agentic strategy, is how do they mitigate? How should we mitigate against issues like that? And how can we ensure quality of agentic applications in an area where LLMs hallucinate? And I know, Percy, this is one of your areas of particular passion. I would love your advice on that.
Yeah, so for a while I've been really interested in evaluation and robustness. I think it's clear that LLMs and agents, their performance is uneven, I would characterize it as. And it's important to really understand when you can depend on them and when you can't. And for certain cases where you have a verifier, a formal verifier that you trust, it's actually okay, right? If you're generating hallucinating, or I guess maybe generating the wrong answer 40% of the time, you just try a few times, and at least it takes longer, but at least you'll be okay. But in cases where you can't verify and you're going to get one shot, then you should really be careful, and you probably don't want to deploy agents in those settings. And of course, there's this gray middle ground where is it, how high stakes is it? I think maybe later we'll talk more about evaluation, but I think I always say lead with evaluation. Figure out what to measure first, because then you can make rational decisions.
Right. Yeah, the old saying is you are what you measure, right? And I know, Roman, you were saying that like the infrastructure is the unsexy part of it, but I actually disagree. And I think for, to be able to get over issues like this one, you do need a good infrastructure, you do need a good backbone. And, what advice would you give people in this space?
I wanted to come back to the point that, and we see actually now a lot of progress, for example, in the code generation, right? So we see the real traction in the business, and we see a lot of that. And I think one of the main reasons is because in this area, you have this formal validation kind of path, right? So you can run the tests and see if it works or not. And one of the things we observed that, for example, in infrastructure side, to support the work of agentic system, what is important is to build a system that let you reproduce a lot of runs. So actually, you need the infrastructure that can kind of guaranteed reproduce the environment with and we know that in difficult systems the environment is important. So this is the example how infrastructure can be not just virtual machine or Kubernetes, right? So you can adopt it to how the development of the agentic system is looks like.
Cool. And we've been talking a lot about code generation, but I'm particularly passionate about not just limiting yourself to code generation with generative AI, right? There's all of the stuff that can be done around your code, right? Documentation, debugging, everything that that makes the task of a developer a little bit more difficult can be made a lot more easy using agentic AI or using generative AI. And I'm curious, Michele, about Replit, what is your thinking in that space around helping people not just write code, but write everything associated with the code all the way down to configuration of the hardware?
Yeah, you're spot on. What's important for a developer is not exclusively generating code, is all the other activities that take the entirety of their time. So we're trying to get an holistic approach on the problem where we take for granted that LLMs are becoming better and better at code gen, arguably sometimes better than the average human at this point, and rather extending our agent with all the other tasks that a user should be doing to create their application successfully. And when it comes to hallucinations, my framework is the following. On one hand, there is all the work that people like Percy and other researchers are putting to make sure that we mitigate as much as possible the amount of errors that an LLM makes. But on the other hand, for people that are building agents, you need to embrace the fact that these errors will happen regardless. And it's very similar to what happens with human developers. We don't expect them to be 100% reliable. And you compensate for that by building tooling and infrastructure around them that allows you to sort of reduce the blast radius of the mistakes that they can do. So in our cases, for instance, with our agent, you can roll back quickly to a version that has been built before, going back to something that was working. We have a lot of tooling to do automatically debugging. And the more we can automate, the more the experience will be smooth and seamless for our users. So all our effort, especially in the last few months, hasn't been on code gen. It has been on all the other activities that the developer spends time on.
Right, so that ensures better quality of output from the developer, and going on to the quality point, I'm really curious. Like with Hugging Face, Thomas, you guys in many ways are the hub of the AI revolution, and what are your thoughts on quality of code development, quality of model development, and we'll get to benchmarking in a moment. But I'm just curious about the impact of generative AI on overall quality.
I think the take we have for us is really to try to, it's really around evaluation and trying to push evaluation of the models. And I think agent in particular is an area where evaluation is still really in the beginning. I expect most. So for instance, what we've done a lot at Hugging Face, in addition to models and data set providing, is putting out leaderboard and benchmarks. So one big that we had over the past few years was the open LLM leaderboards, where we did a couple of iterations around standard evaluation. And we just phased it out yesterday, actually. We stopped. And the idea is, we think going into 2025, all evaluation should move to agentic. We think it's really how model should be used, will be used more and more. So we think keeping this old way of just testing the knowledge of this model is not a good way, moving forward. And something we were discussing with Michele and Percy just before entering was how very few good evaluation of the in particular code agents we have out there. We have SweBench, and basically that's almost all. There's a couple of very old school ones, I would say, but there is definitely a need for better ways to understand where this new sort of AI system fail and how they fail. And it's interesting also that you see that the team that create these AI models, Anthropic is one example, for instance, are not always the one that can take the best advantage of them when integrated in agents, right? I think Replit is one example. Manus was a big news last month, right? Basically using this LLM in much better way, or at least apparently much better way on some tasks. So there is all this evaluation, which is not the same as just evaluating the LLM, but which is evaluating the whole system as a whole, right? To understand where are the mistakes, and they are not always a hallucination. They are sometimes much more, polyform, I think. Yeah.
So, and that brings me to benchmarks, right? So often I get a lot of pushback in the industry around, with the fact that new models are coming at us thick and fast, and every model seems to be claiming to be doing better on this benchmark over that benchmark. And as a result, with new models and new benchmarks and new results against benchmarks, it almost feels like benchmarks are being devalued. How would you feel about that? I'd love all of your opinions on that, first of all. And can you think of a way maybe that we can evaluate models better than just mere benchmarks? Yeah. Maybe start with Roman.
Yeah, first I wanted to build on what Thomas said, that at the end of the day, the entire evaluation approach should move from benchmarking the components to benchmarking the systems. So because at the end of the day, we don't care how many mistakes were made in the process if the final result was correct. So, and then it brings us to the situation when defining the metrics or benchmarks becomes much more specialized task for the particular, task you want to solve, right? So you still want to have this generic understanding of the quality, but we see that the competition, the race is so that finally the gap becomes smaller and smaller, which is expected. And I think we will see, my expectation, we'll see a lot of benchmarking shifting to the, let's say, application or even customer side. So we'll see enterprises defining their understanding of what is important, and then it measures the holistic system, not just the LLM or any other component.
Percy?
So having worked on benchmarks for a while, I mean, I think the thing to realize is that all benchmarks are wrong, right? They measure the wrong thing. Every single benchmark measures the wrong thing.
I'm really glad you said that and not me.
but at the same time, you should think about each benchmark as a surrogate, and maybe some are closer than others, right? And I think there's a trade-off. I don't actually personally think we should ditch all the benchmarks and go to only the kind of the end evaluation, because I think there's a whole range of the role of benchmarking is just to get information about how well your system is working, which pieces are working, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you have perplexity as not the company, the metric, which is basically a log loss in your data. Very detached from any real application, but I think for model development is actually very useful still, because it gives you very nuanced measures of progress. And then you have maybe multiple choice question answering, which you can scoff at, but I think clearly have driven a lot of progress in AI to maybe more realistic benchmarks to actually the thing that's ecologically valid, right? And I would say all of this gives you information, right? And I think the important thing is that you should learn how to map the information from any benchmark to what you care about. So people start developing intuitions about MMLU, right? Clearly not related probably to anyone's task, but it still carries value and it's correlated. So we have seen some, there's research that looks at the benchmarks and their correlation across models. And many of the benchmarks are actually very well correlated, even though on the surface they seem like they're measuring the wrong thing, right? So I think the framework I think about this is that measure all the things, look at all the numbers, build intuitions for which ones to maybe trust. And at the end, sure, you definitely need to evaluate your final system, but you can also leverage all the information if you know how to read the numbers.
Great advice. Thanks, Percy. How about Michele?
I'll tag along on what Percy was saying. Yes, all the benchmarks are wrong, but we still need them desperately, especially in the coding space. And I'm glad that academia is working on them. I'm glad companies like Hugging Face are really like a beacon in this space, creating a lot of them. And I think even smaller startups like Replit and are actually starting to work on that can contribute to benchmarks. It's probably uncanny how much you can influence the field by releasing an amazing benchmark that is adopted widely. I think as we bench that Thomas was mentioning, it hasn't been released by a giant company. It has been released by a small group of people at Princeton, and it has been carried over for a couple of years at this point. So I encourage everyone to try to encapsulate the problem that they're facing and release it as an eval. It might get wide adoption, even if unexpected, and that's exactly what we need. Like I get on a lot of calls, with Anthropic, Google, and others explaining what goes wrong with our agent. But one thing is to give a qualitative description of what is wrong, and another thing is to provide reproducible steps on what actually is not working. So I'm glad that there are a lot of PhDs often ask me, shall I get in a PhD program right now, given that all the training is happening in the industry? And I always tell them, yes, go and create benchmarks. That's how you can influence the entire field.
Very cool. Thomas?
Yeah, I think you can also think benchmark nice in that they force you to think really in the future when you create them. So one example, Gaia benchmark that became a little bit visible this year because of O3 and agents. We created this benchmark with Yann Lequin and co-authors, Clem and Gregory. 1 year ago, we were like, this is something almost impossible for agents. They have to, when they participate in the Gaia benchmark, they have to go, surf on the web. They have to find website. They have to click on things. They have to use like a lot of things that were almost impossible to use 1 year ago. But this year, definitely huge progress have been made on this benchmark just in a couple of months. So the nice thing when you think about the benchmark is it forces you to think, okay, what is totally impossible to build right now, but in 2 years, I really would like to see this happen. So that's a cool way, I think, to think about how you want to build an application, a system, or maybe just build the future in general.
Can I add one comment?
Yeah, please.
This is building out of Michele's comment, is that all of you are using language models. So please, every time you use a language model and it fails, that's a valuable data point. So please stick it up somewhere on a repo and tweet it out or something, because collectively, I think that's the way you build a benchmark. You get all the use cases that real people are actually, instead of like looking at academics, what do we know, right? You guys are actually using these systems, and we want to represent that.
I think some of the cloud sponsors should give us some cloud storage, and everybody upload their stuff to that storage, so we have that collection. We've just got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to kind of get to one last thing, and it was really like, we're in this rapidly changing and evolving AI landscape, and it can often be whiplash trying to keep up. I'd love to hear what advice everybody on the panel has to give, and I'll start with giving my own. And that is like, first thing you should do is like go onto LinkedIn, go onto Twitter, and find those people who have like lots and lots of engagement in the AI space and ignore them. Because there's so much hype with a few exceptions, of course, but there's so much hype out there in the AI space, and there's so many people engagement farming by telling you coding is dead or stuff like that, and completely ignore that and invest your time instead in education. Invest your time instead in doing some of the short courses on deep learning, or some of the long courses on deep learning too. And like I think that's the only way you'll really be able to determine the signal from the noise. And so that would be my one tip that I would give to folks, and maybe starting with Thomas and coming down, like what in this landscape, what advice would you give to developers to be prepared?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would say, you have to keep. The AI field is a nice way to keep us very young, because we have to keep tackle new things every year, right? So this year is agents, so you need to understand. I'm already trying to prepare for next year and the year after. I think robotics is something you should start following. It's going to happen. AI for science, just not LLM for writing text, but LLM for inventing proteins, material discovery. This is going to come in the coming 1-2 years. So prepare yourself, free some room with old framework that you can forget in your head, and prepare to learn new things.
You say it keeps us young. I had black hair when I started in the AI.
Same, not only you.
Michele?
I would say build in public. So it's true, there is a subset of people living on social, just doing engagement farming, but there is also a long tail of amazing builders that are there to share their opinion and share their lessons. And you can't really learn if you don't start to build things with your own hands. That's how you get an intuition of what works today, what doesn't work today. And I think it also informs you where the future is going. And like personally for me, it was back in the days when I was seeing benchmarks having a wide gap between passed 1 and passed 100, like doing a lot of different attempts, which is the same that we see today in a different way with test time compute. You can get an idea of what we're going to be capable of doing 6-12 months from today, reliably. And that's probably what you want to start to build today. Because in 1 year, you're going to be able to ship it as a product. So yeah, open-mindedness for what the future holds. That's my recommendation.
Yeah. So even though there's a lot of change and turmoil and all this progress in AI, I think the things that remain constant are the problems, and not the. What I would recommend is really think about the problems you're trying to solve. Look at the data. I don't know how often I come to talk to people who are trying to solve a problem. They look at metrics, they look at platforms and toolkits and whatever, the latest model, and they just don't look at the data and see what the actual model is doing. So please, do that, because then I think that is the thing that's constant, right? All the other stuff, come and go. Tomorrow will be a different platform or a framework, but building the intuitions for your problem, the problem that you're trying to solve, and also turning that into a benchmark, if you will. I think that is the thing that's going to remain kind of constant in some sense.
Yeah, I don't know what advice to give. I would maybe say what the main challenge for me and what advice I would love to give myself. And I think the most of the challenge is everything changes so fast, and every week you wake up with the feeling that you lost everything, that you are late, that everything is changed and you don't need it, and so on. And I think this resilience of focusing on solving some real tasks and problems, it's very important. And if we keep it, then you start seeing that so much progress, but still so few real implications in the life. And if you look like in whatever, consumers or businesses, like we yet at the very, 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 very beginning of any kind of real adoption, and so many things to be solved in the future. So like keep resilience, and then something will figure out. So probably that's my advice to myself.
Very cool. Always good to give yourself advice. And I'd just like to wrap with, you know, an encouragement to everybody in the room. And it was something that Andrew brought up in his keynote earlier on when he was telling the story of like Tommy, who works with Andrew, who's an art history expert, who helped him build a better prompt. And I think one of the things that, as we're getting increasingly automated and as we're getting increasingly able to scale beyond ourselves with AI, it's your domain expertise and your domain knowledge is only becoming more valuable. I think there's a lot of hype out there to make you feel that it's less valuable, but it's not. That expertise that you have, be it in coding, be it in the industry that you're working in, if it's medicine, if it's movies, if it's legal or whatever, it's building up that domain expertise and being able to express that expertise in a way that you can scale and build better applications as a result is going to be intensely valuable as we move forward. And coming to events like this one and building community like this, and you know, so that we can support and encourage each other and we can learn from each other, is a major part of that. So with that, I just want to say thank you everybody for your attention and enjoy the rest of your day.